So mine is going to be a lot less sort of focused on what the nuts and bolts of the assessment is for English language learners. That is, English language learners are going to be taking these assessments with various kinds of accommodations, and some of those accommodation practices are very much in the works. Both Smarter Balanced and PARC have released various versions of documents around accommodation practices. Smarter Balanced, as Barb mentioned earlier, will have some of their assessments available in different languages. They also are doing a very innovative thing that I'll make note of, which is to tag the items for language complexity. All of their items will be separately tagged, so there'll be data available on not the text complexity, but the language complexity, including vocabulary and grammatical features of the items, which will be incredible boons for researchers who want to look at the relationship between the content and language. And so I think that's a really, really positive step, and it's part of our role as researchers to try to make good use of those kinds of valuable data. But what I'm going to do is spend my time talking about the context for why there are both. Of course, we can identify many challenges for English language learners in this environment, but also that there are some real opportunities, I think, for trying to improve the quality of rigor and instruction for English language learners. And I'm going to really focus on some of those opportunities, and then talk about the crosswalk relationships that we have to start thinking about between the content assessments, Smarter Balanced and PARC, as well as the assessments that exist, mostly through Title III, for English language proficiency assessments. And there really is an important conversation that needs to take place between sort of the crosswalk of those assessment systems. So that will be kind of the end point of my talk. But let's see. This is just, so what I'm going to do is give you a bit of a sense of the challenge, and in order to look forward, I mean, a lot of this conversation today is about looking forward to these new assessments, and maybe not forward in the great excitement or whatever, but looking forward as in terms of the time spectrum, looking forward to what's coming. But also it's sort of important to look back at what we have now, and also look backwards to see why we are where we are today. This just gives you data. This is from LA Unified, which has a large number of English language learners in a very large district, showing the probability of kids meeting various criteria, and the curve on the right is the reclassification. So these are when kids no longer become English language learners. So after having been in the district for 6 to 7 to 8 years, you're getting kids, about 60 to 70% of kids who are no longer English language learners. So they're reclassified, redesignated, whatever your state calls them. And then if you look at their probability of attaining the various criteria that go into redesignation, what you see in the steepest curve, the green line, is for their listening speaking skills. This is the California assessment. So this is just their kind of basic conversational vocabulary and so forth, basic levels. And you see that within 2 or 3 years the kids attain that, but what really gets in the way of reclassification are the reading, writing components of the English language proficiency and the state English language arts assessment, CST in California. And you'll see that it's basically a jumble of things, but they pretty much tell you the same thing, that the kids are struggling with literacy, such that let's say after 5 years, still about 70 to 80% of the kids have met that bar. But this is our present picture. That bar is going to go up. The demands are the language demands, just the kinds of items that that Karen just shared with us, the amount of language load that's going to go into even appreciating or equitably benefiting from the kind of pre-discussion activities of the text before taking, before reading and so forth are quite high. And so it's clear that what you're going to see is all of these kind of bars be challenged. And so I'm going to skip over the next two slides, which basically show that as you go up in the grades, the English language learner population, which is the blue and the red bars, if you just cut across grades, are basically your long-term English learners. And the kids who are redesignated are the greens. So, this is California State, the same district, where the large, as you go up in the grades, basically the kids who are designated English learners are predominantly kids who've been in that status and been struggling, trying to get redesignated. They haven't been, the kids who have been redesignated are no longer in that group, so they become more and more challenging. And you see more of that sort of challenge coming up in the middle to high school, and I think we're going to kind of see that as a pattern. Okay, now looking back in history a little bit, why am I showing you two Xerox machines? It's really, I would characterize the challenge of inclusion of English language learners in reforms, and the Common Core being the most recent reform, as one of trying to kind of fight this bifurcation problem for English language learners, and for them it's often a bifurcation of language and content. And I thought of these, I like to show pictures when I talk about sort of important policy concepts, and these two Xerox machines, if you were in schools in the 70s and 80s, you'll remember these two copying machines or two identical machines of some sorts that were, the Title I machine and the Title VII machine, and sometimes there's also the special ed machine, and really, if you look back in history, there's a reason why that happened for English language learners. They came, they popped to our attention because of the Civil Rights Act that resulted in the ESEA. It's late in the day, so it's worth taking a look at this picture of Johnson signing ESEA in Texas, where we are. And I love this picture because he's sitting there with whom,
His teacher?
His elementary school teacher, right? And that's how he signed ESEA. And I love his posture. I mean, his posture is a kid's posture, isn't it? I love looking at this picture just for that reason. But if you go back to that, very, very early on, Title VII was introduced as the Bilingual Education Act, and that was really a language-defined act, right? Saying, okay, so maybe Title I would address content, but Title VII is going to really address the language piece, and so. This is sort of, and that was tied in the court cases, Lau v. Nichols, which ruled on the basis of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act about national origin discrimination and access on the basis of language, right? So that's the added piece. That's the challenge for English language learners, and because of that, we end up with programs that sort of separate them out because of this bifurcation problem, because of the copier problem. You want to be able to say we're doing this versus that. So now's the time to focus on that language, and then the rest of the time we'll focus on content. And it goes all the way back to the two Xerox machine problem. Right? Then what we're trying to solve, and the challenge now is, with standards, you say, well, standards are for all students. That's what the Nation at Risk Commission, a lot of old people came up with this idea of Nation at Risk. Clinton eventually signed this law, first post-2000, and then the Improving America's Schools Act early in his term. That introduced the idea of standards. Then again, it was sort of this question of the bifurcation of language and content, Title I, Title VII, how do we sort of put them together? And then that gets played out again in No Child Left Behind. But in No Child Left Behind, what this was the last time, by the way, Boehner was seen standing around a table with Democrats. That is Boehner, by the way, on the right. And what No Child Left Behind included was, these are the big words in No Child Left Behind: inclusion, right? Inclusion of English learners under Title I, and disaggregation. You got to keep, sort of disaggregate the data, and that's really an important piece. We expect that in reauthorization, if the law ever gets reauthorized, we'll have a disaggregation piece in there. But also in Title III, the law tried to deal with this issue of alignment, like bringing language and content together. Because we know that you can't have these two things separated. And so they talked about sort of the alignment of the English language proficiency standards and the tests that go with it to Title I. Right? So that's, it's some of you, if you're your local, director, you will know terms like AAMAO 3 will mean something. AAMAO 3 is about attaining the content standards for English learners, and that's an effort by the law to try to deal with this bifurcation problem. And that's what that's what the Common Core Challenge brings once again, right, to us. So here comes the Common Core. And I think I love this picture just because it's, it's a beautiful picture, but I don't know if 4 or 5 years ago, if I woke up in the morning and thought, if I were king, what would I do? Let's have the Common Core, I don't think that's what I would have decided, 4 years ago. But this surfer didn't create this wave either, So I think of the Common Core as being something like a wave. It has a lot more critical, kind of energy behind it because it is shared by, 45 or I guess 46 states now. Alaska just joined. So it does have, it's just a much bigger wave. There's a lot of activity. And the thing so I work with a pretty exciting group of collaborators in a project called Understanding Language. And we have, if you Google Understanding Language, you'll get to our website. And we work around the challenges and opportunities of the Common Core for English language learners. And if you go there, you'll see lots of resources. And we have many archived webinars. So if you're ever bored, there's nothing more dreadful than watching archived webinars. So we have lots of archived webinars on various topics. But one of the arguments we have there is really that these new standards, and we've looked at not just ELA. I know this conference is especially focused on ELA, but there's a lot of important language pieces in math, especially around the mathematical practices, understanding the reasoning of others, which is really related to classroom discourse practices, or in science as well. That the next generation science standards. That they all, clearly raise the bar for learning. That's, evident. But they also raise the demand for language in ways that I think need to be spotlighted. And there's a kind of a theory of action implicit in much of the standards around classroom discourse across all subject areas. And, math, the understanding the reasoning of others, or the way that you get to sort of text-based evidence, the way in which you might support that is through classroom discourse. And so those are the features from a language point of view that the Common Core brings, both as a challenge and as standards. So these are, kind of the sorts of things one would look at around English language arts and math, constructing effective arguments, math, constructing arguments and so forth. And so those are clearly very language-based. If you look at science, I'm quite excited about the next generation science standards, especially in middle school and high school. They talk about peer review practices and the sorts of genres that are involved in that are going to be very linguistically demanding, not just for English language learners, but for all students. So the problem that this at least helps solve in some ways or address for English language learners is that if Gates Foundation recently did a survey of school districts around materials for ELD or ESL as it's called in other parts of the country. And one of the challenges that most districts identify is just not finding really good, very good content in those areas, or very challenging, that it's typically watered down. And part of why it's that way is because a lot of the way in which the system is defined and bifurcated language and content is that they're sort of separated. And when you look for overlaps, they overlap around maybe vocabulary, drilling, often devoid of context or with a little bit of constructed context just to make the vocabulary seem sort of relevant, but not embedded in real text or the text of the content, or focusing on grammar. And if you look at the Common Core from the perspective of what kinds of language functions and actions are required to support it, vocabulary and sentence structures and things like that are certainly important. And you might need to look at the structure of a text in order to point to a particular sort of piece of evidence that supports an argument. But really the discourse, the text explanations, argumentations, and even the purpose of a text and so forth are, persuasion and so forth are really highlighted. And so this really kind of sort of is an opportunity to push back against the natural forces of bifurcating language and content instruction. So it's very much, I appreciated the paper that David, sitting back there, wrote about the Common Core, the research base of the Common Core, some of which is around the sort of the content literacy piece. And it's very much sort of the language parallel to that. That is, it really shifts the kinds of responsibilities of who is going to sort of, much like, you need there to be kind of collaboration of science teachers with dealing with science literacy, that you also need to really bring the specialist in English language development into the responsibility for that to the content teacher as well. And the Common Core really provides that kind of opportunity. So, and some of those are, as with the peer review practices and the science makes very clear, are quite specific to the discipline and so forth. So some of the shifts in the new standards that one would pay attention to are things that you're quite familiar with by looking through the standards, and we think that they will clearly pose great challenges, but all of which will require collaboration, and so I think that's really an important takeaway here. That's just to say that the system is complex, and while at the school site level or district level it's really important, there are really important conversations that also need to be taking place at the state level and so forth. All of these slides just say that kids have to do various things with language. So it's not just learning vocabulary and grammar, that they need to participate in working with peers, effective oral and written interactions with teachers, explaining, demonstrating their knowledge, and extract meaning from complex written text. So where are we with English language learners and English language proficiency? And some of you, unless you work in a state, this hasn't really quite come down to schools or districts yet. But if you follow what's going on with states, you know that states signed these waivers, right? Because ESEA won't be reauthorized, and so states are now. And if you look at the states that either already have waivers or have applied for waivers, those are the blue and the green states. So almost all the states have been granted waivers. Freddie, our poor state, the white state in the West, has applied and been rejected. So California won't have waivers, but just about the rest of the country will, and which also further de-incentivizes the administration from pushing for reauthorization, because they sort of have what they want through the waivers. And contained in the waiver is a piece only if you listen, if you're an English learner person, would you pay attention to, which is that the states have already signed off on this agreement that they would adopt state English language proficiency standards. So this is the Title III piece, right? And then that's what drives the state assessment for English language proficiency that correspond to college career ready standards that reflect academic language skills necessary. That's the federal, they never say Common Core, they really call it the college career ready standards. And so basically all of these waiver states have signed off by saying our English language proficiency standards will correspond to the Common Core. And so basically, you know, what does correspond mean? Correspond is a great example of policy making in which a new terminology gets thrown in because they don't want to use alignment, because alignment isn't the right word. Alignment is apples to apples. You know, of course, so they said, oh, it's not exactly that, but you know, the language, let's use correspond. So they added correspond, and so now lots of state level people and lawyers are looking up correspond in the dictionary and saying, what exactly does it mean? And to me, what it means is correspond are the language demands of the content standards. So it's those aspects of language that go beyond vocabulary and grammar to actions of language embedded in the expectations of content instruction in the content standards as in the ELA standards. So now the standards in the area of English language proficiencies and then the assessments that will be aligned to those standards will need to shift in that direction. Because right now they're more or less aligned towards vocabulary, grammar, and grammatical correctness and so forth. So this correspond turns out to be a pretty important word. There is a document that was produced for state standards people. So it has a horrible title, but it tries to define. It's a document that tries to define correspond. It basically combs through the ELA and the math and the next generation science standards and tries to highlight the language demands within the standards. And so it was created for a state to be able to, in a sense, certify or to give a federal assurance that the new English language proficiency standard, which is state by state at this point, will correspond to the Common Core. But it contains in it a whole lot of really good analysis of language demands in sort of both looking at the various expectations of language of students in the classroom. If you Google parts of this title, you'll come up with it, or go to the Council of Chiefs website, you'll find it. And it's Gary Cook with WIDA is developing a teacher's manual based on this to make it a little bit more friendly for teachers and others. Challenges and opportunities created here. One is coordinating and collaborating on ELD, I should say, standards as well as instruction and resources. But that is truly an opportunity to really invigorate that intersection area between what happens in ELD. A lot of districts are required to have this time anyway, right? So then how do you do it in such a way that it really truly reinforces the academic literacy development for English learners. And my guess is that if it's done right, it will also be seen as very useful for all students, or almost all students, and not just for English language learners. The appropriate accommodations in the new assessments, you've already kind of heard about what Park and Smarter Balanced are doing, but that needs to really be continued, kind of conversation with those consortia. Again, changing language constructs for English language assessments to the extent that language assessment is much more. Language is much more a part of the content than if the language proficiency assessments are expected to, kind of align or correspond to it. Those assessments really need to change. I'm really interested in seeing where the formative assessment conversation goes, especially around supporting both the students' language proficiency capacity and level that they're at, as well as the language demands of the task itself, and trying to assess that. And then there just has to be, massive coordination across multiple levels of the system. Again, schools don't exist in isolation. They exist in the context of districts that do things, and then, that exist in the context of states, and states collaborate. There are two consortia of states that have developed English language proficiency assessments. So on the rows you have the Smarter Balanced and the Park, and on the columns what you see is assets and ELPA 21. Assets is WIDA, right? And WIDA is a consortium of states that has Wisconsin, Illinois, and a number of states. And you'll see them identified there. And then ELPA 21 is a new consortium of states that was funded by the U.S. Department of Education's Enhanced Assessment Grant to develop assessments that are aligned to the new ELP standards that will correspond to the Common Core. So this is sort of a bit of a domino thing, but basically they're all supposed to sort of align to correspond to the Common Core, and different states have kind of, so it's a 2x2 matrix. Plus, if you have the standalone states, you've got the 3x3, and this is the kind of conversation that need to happen across states. It's interesting because all of the states that are either in assets or in ELPA 21 or in Smarter Balanced or Park, believe it or not, have signed on to an agreement to adopt a common definition of English language learners.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's an interesting exercise to be going through, because now actually all of these consortia have to talk to each other because of the way in which they've sort of spread out, or there'll be 4 different definitions, but it's shared, or it'll be a great coordination effort. So that conversation is sort of moving forward right now. So anyway, I think I'll stop there.